Welcome everyone to the EED webinar on March 17th. This is webinar number 4 of 2021. And the theme today is the coach's dilemma. What I mean by that is I had been a supervisor for coaches for over 15 years. I was on faculty with CTI, and very commonly, coaches either walk into the coaching profession still unclear about what their role and function is as a coach. What are we really doing here? Or they may be clear, but their clients are not. And what can happen is many times the client will start projecting onto the coach to be their guru, to be their helper, their fixer, their savior, their consultant, etc. And there can be a lot of misunderstanding between coach and client, or on the client's end, which actually disempowers the relationship. So it's really important that the coach is clear to themselves of what they're doing, and that they can transmit that clarity back to the client and keep the client invested. Because sometimes the client is more invested in receiving help or being saved, or someone else to do the work and the fixing for them. And they think, oh, I'm paying good money for this coach and nothing's really happening, but they don't realize that they're the ones that have to do the work. So it can be a dilemma for the coach to keep high investment from the client in the relationship, keep the client enrolled, and keep the client invested in themselves, and resist the temptation to go outside of their defined role. So that can be a tricky spot for coaches sometimes. And some examples of some of these traps that can happen would be the client will just throw up their hands and say, oh God, I just wish you could tell me what to do. Or the coach might be thinking, I wish I could just tell them what to do. And coaches are not consultants as defined by the International Coach Federation. So they actually can't tell the client what to do, technically. And that can lead to a temptation to want to fix things either from the coach's end or the client's end, or they want to speed up the transformation process. They want to skip over the unpleasantries and get to the good stuff. And that can include, some coaches have a low tolerance for client suffering. And sometimes the client can come into the relationship suffering, or project that into onto the coach. And actually, sometimes that could be conscious or unconscious. Okay, we're back. I had to pause for a second because there was a delivery at my door. So I left off with speaking of client suffering, and there was a question, what do we mean by client suffering? So basically, when the client will show up to a session in the victim role or the poor me, and they're asking or appealing to the coach's compassion and empathy, and we do want the compassion and empathy, but we need to be very careful that we're not appealing to the weaker self of the client, where the client is basically handing off, saying, please do the work for me, because we're here to train the client on cultivating their own resilience. And if we buy into, let's say, I'll call it their self-indulgence. Now that might sound cruel or mean, but what I mean is they're not picking themselves up by the bootstraps. They're asking us to do that for them. We're actually not being helpful. So I think, well, that's very succinct. I was a little more detailed before when we were off the recording, but we'll get into that a little bit more. And then sometimes there's these power struggles. Sometimes you'll get, like, and this can happen with corporate coaching, you'll get these high-powered individuals that are, they're sitting back, they've got their arms folded, and they'll say, show me what you can do. And they'll start testing the coach, and they're testing the coach's competence. And some coaches can feel intimidated by that. So I want to discuss the power struggles that can happen, or where the coach is giving you the runaround, being ambiguous. Again, they're not doing the work, they're passing it off onto you. How do you handle that? Okay. And then finally, also, there's this classic response from the client, I don't know. And what do we do with that? Because it just stops the coaching dead in its tracks with that response. And there's many reasons why the client is saying, I don't know. And none of it means that they're uncoachable. So I wanted to, towards the end of this webinar, break it down to say what could possibly be happening when they say, I don't know, and give you some remedies for that, okay? Just very quick announcement. So the idea of these webinars is to introduce you to some concepts that Emergent Essence Dynamics works with. And Emergent Essence Dynamics is applicable to coaching, leadership, facilitation, healing, psychology, all of this, because it deals with human dynamics. And its main focus is to have people access their core essence and build their resilience and autonomy. And from there, transformation can happen. It's a more natural, organic, and truthful transformation when it comes from from a person's own core essence, as opposed to trying to fix or transform something that might end up being artificial because we're actually avoiding the core issue. So what EED does is it brings out very quickly what that core issue is, what the pattern is that's driving the person, and then from there, from a resilient state, we can shift those patterns. I'm hoping that makes sense. So we have a training module coming up on April 9th to 11th, and that's where you get the real nitty-gritty, in-depth foundation of how to build resilience, how to recognize patterns, work with relationship dynamics. Much of what we're talking about today, I'm giving you the concept and a few practical tools. In these 3-day training modules, you get the in-depth tools, practice skills, and supervised practice. So that's coming up April 9th to 11th. And I will have a program info call on March 23rd, where it's a live Q&A. So I could spend more time telling you what it's all about and what exactly we do. And I've just decided to schedule a special webinar on March 31st. I haven't quite figured out what I'm going to do yet as a theme, but I wanted to do another webinar before our next one, which is actually April 7th. So watch for those. You can look at our website, essence-dynamics.com, to get all those announcements, or look at our YouTube channel to see the recording of this and other recordings of past webinars. And that also gives you the links to the Eventbrite site to sign up for our courses and for our webinars. So here's what we're covering, just again, to be very short. We're getting an overview of the common traps that will disempower the coaching relationship. And I want to clarify what really the coach role is, and I'm coming from how EED sees the coach role, and how to keep it really clean. Because when you keep it clean, it becomes really easy. Now, with that, I'll give you some simple ways to remain really pure in the coach role and remain centered and focused there. But you still will be able to borrow from other roles where you still can advise or consult. You can even save, help, or fix, but that's not your primary role. And EED embraces that, but gives you a workaround so that you don't have to refuse consulting or leading or training the client. In fact, what we teach is you'll have a combined skill set of coaching, facilitation, leadership, as well as being a mediator of conflict. Because when you have that kind of a combined skill set, that really enhances and empowers your versatility as a coach. Whatever your primary role is, you can borrow, but you must know what's primary. And along the way, give you some tips for how to neutralize codependency, because that can creep into the coaching relationship. The client can be projecting upon you. How do you neutralize that? How do you deal with some power struggles? What to do when the client is very ambiguous, or when the client gets manipulative, or to watch your own unconscious manipulations of the client. We'll talk about what that could look like. So before I move on, are there any questions or comments here? Anything special that you'd like me to note or cover? Or how does this all sound for you guys?
All good.
Yeah, okay. And along the way, please feel free to interrupt me to give comments or questions. So I already talked a little bit about what is EED, what does it do? It's basically a model that works like sort of the engine that's driving human dynamics. So if you're a coach, you're a leader, you're a trainer, you're all driving these different kinds of cars. But what you're really doing is you're working with the same engine that makes that car move forward. So we can all drive different cars and drive in different ways, but we're all working with the same engine. And that is, there are fundamental patterns that are occurring in relationships. That could be relationship to self, to other, to the world, even to time. This is what we're calling human dynamics. So EED is a model that works with that. It makes then your coaching clearer and cleaner, as well as your leadership, mediation, facilitation, healing. It applies to all of it. Why? Because it's all dealing with that engine. So one of our foundations here is that we work with action and behavior. We don't work with story and narrative. We go beyond story and narrative, because it's really the actions and behaviors that are going to reveal the patterns that's driving the moment. And those patterns work in cycles. They're fractal in nature, meaning you've got the same pattern working on all levels, from the most simple to the most complex. So because today we're working with the coaching relationship, how your client is behaving with you means they're behaving somewhere else with someone else. The same pattern is occurring. So rather than getting frustrated or discouraged about that pattern, you can actually use it as information to get a deeper transformation with the client. When we pinpoint the pattern, then we can we know that that's what's driving the person, the issue, and their process of transformation. So what we're doing here with EED is we're reconciling those patterns in a resilient state, meaning we have to build resilience. B, we have to look at what's going on in the dynamic, what is happening with all the actions and behaviors. Then transformation can occur. And we're looking at what's the client's unique transformational process. And when we see it through fractal patterns and cycles, it makes it very simple. And that transformation is happening in a resilient state. So this is why, number one, we're building resilience first, all right? So module one, when we do the training, we focus on resilience. Module two focuses on all the forms of resistance that you can run into, all the complex games. Module three pulls it all together so that we can work with both resilience and resistance in order to shift patterns. And module three is the most tool heavy, because it gives you all the ways that you can build vision, take action, establish essential purpose, etc. So you can build upon the shifts that are happening in the pattern. How's that for you guys? Or is it going over the head? It's all good, okay. The idea with EED is it just simplifies your work, because primarily you're working with resilience, and the resilience will naturally take care of those patterns. So we mentioned some of these common traps that can happen in coaching. So first I'm going to say, well, I'm going to ask you, what is the coach's role? What are you understanding there? I'm giving you an opportunity to come at me with what you know, or what you've been trained as, or what you believe. Because different coaching schools may clarify the role in different ways. What are you taught, or what do you believe? What is a coach really doing here with the client?
I would definitely say that my role is to facilitate a client to become more resourceful and find their own answers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's to build that resourcefulness.
Yeah.
In the process.
Okay. Without resorting to consulting, without resorting to analysis, without resorting to, I mean, I'm talking the way the ICF was originally founded, because when they came up in the early 90s, they were trying to find the sweet spot into between, we're not a consultant, we're not psychotherapists, we're something in between. And the basic idea is the coach or the client will manage themselves. It's a self-directed transformation. And the coach is in a way holding the space, they're holding the parameters, the guidance for the client to self-direct. But like you said, Sue, how do they access the resourcefulness? How do they come into a direct experience of what it is to be resourceful? So here's where some of the traps come in is, well, resourcefulness could just be a good idea, but it's not deeply felt. So there is an expertise of a coach. I mean, this is what I thought about for the 15 years that I was training coaches, where I was like, so we can say coaches are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. We can say the coach is not an expert, but they actually are an expert in something. Because otherwise, why would they be hired, right? So for years, I was thinking, well, what are they an expert of? And one of the conclusions I came to is, well, they're an expert at guiding the client to come into contact with their resourcefulness. Okay. So, well, then what does that require? It requires that the client observe how the client is acting and behaving. Are they moving away from or towards or into their own resourcefulness? Then they can bring awareness to the client, but they must allow the client to always make choices. The coach cannot make choices for the client, because then they move into consulting or they're coming from bias. So this is a very tricky spot. A coach is not coming from personal bias, personal politics, or personal identity. So in fact, I say coaching is very disciplined. Now, there's a drawback to that, where then the coach is like, well, then I guess I can't be a human being, because I'm supposed to have no bias. I'm supposed to be all accepting. And then there's a risk that the coach could become very passive. And then, for example, the coach could only ask questions, and then it can start running things into a circle. So part of why I developed EED was I said, well, there must be a balance where the coach can inject something that provokes the client, to nudge them forward, to give them a poke. But then they also have to create from the response of the client, where the coach is primarily always creating from the client's response. Why? To facilitate the client coming into contact with their resilience. So what I'm saying is a coach is there to awaken the resilience of the client primarily, and restore their access to that inner source. Go ahead, Sue.
What's your definition of resilience? Because I instead use the word resourcefulness.
Yeah. Okay, that's very good. I'm going to say resourcefulness is the second level. It's the result of resilience. So actually, I'm going to say when we access that inner source, which will be that permanent, timeless aspect of ourselves, the part that cannot be destroyed, cannot be knocked down. Okay, that's it has nothing to do with our identity. All right. When we have access to that source, there's a feeling of permanence, timelessness, calm, peace. This is where we can feel aspects of unity, even essential qualities like limitlessness or unconditional love. There's a natural generosity that comes from source. Then from there comes a feeling of I cannot be destroyed. I can be crushed, but it doesn't destroy my core vitality. It doesn't destroy my will to live. So this is what I'm defining as resilience. It's that innate natural vitality, that will to live, the ability to bounce back, to rise up, the ability to create. It's that divine spark within us that is never snuffed out. Now, we can lose everything, but that doesn't mean all is lost. All right. The resilience will say, I'm still okay. I'm still here. All right. Then from there, from that, I'm okay, I possess infinite creativity. Now I have access to resources. That's what I'm saying. That's where the resourcefulness comes from. How is that for you, Sue, as a breakdown?
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. I would use different words, but it makes sense to me. I get it.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, there is no point to try to solve or fix a problem until we've accessed that level of source, because it's from there that the client can then self-direct, because they're coming from their own source and there's no dependence on you or someone else as some external source of power or wisdom. Okay. So that brings us to some of the traps. One that is common is that the client will walk into the session naturally coming from need or desperation or a low status or a victimhood or fear, because they're walking in saying, I have a problem and I need this fixed. And even coaches will say, so what is the problem here, or what is it you want to work on? Most times the client is going to walk in and say, well, here's what I'm not satisfied with. Okay. It's very rare a client will say, hey, everything is going wonderful and great. And I remember when I was working with beginner coaches and supervising, they say, well, what do I do with that? Because it seems like there's no point to my job. So 98% of the time, client will naturally walk in from a low status. Now that can create victimhood. That could bait the coach, whether the coach is baited or they'll try to hook the coach in to say, come on, stroke my victimhood here. And what they're really doing is they're putting the coach into high status. When the coach is in high status, the client is making them into an expert, a consultant, or a fixer, a savior, a helper, etc. Save me, help me, fix me, etc. So beware of that. It's always there, just beware, okay? Sometimes the client can chip away at the confidence level or the competence level of the coach. This is a big trap for beginners because they're still a little wobbly with their own methodologies that they're learning. And then a client can smell that. And if the client is putting up a wall, they may come at the coach and say, well, you're just a beginner, or you don't know what you're really doing, or you don't understand me. Again, does the coach buy into that? How does the coach become immune to that? Okay. And if they understand this is actually just a client game that's coming from fear or resistance. With that, the client can make the coach work hard, meaning now there's an imbalance in the relationship. Most coaching methodologies will teach that there's 100% buy-in and investment from both coach and the client, and that empowers the relationship. It's the relationship that's doing the work. When this imbalance happens, the client can start to withdraw or be resistant or be ambiguous or even unresponsive. Like when they say, I don't know, and they're pushing all the responsibility back onto the coach and waiting for the coach to do the fixing of the work. Like even, what does a coach do with these long, uncomfortable silences that come from the client end? Because that's a silent baiting. Like if I don't answer, I know within 3, 4, 5 seconds, the coach is going to come in. Now the client has won because the coach has taken the power. Now they're doing more work. And what's really going on is the client has all the power and the coach is just running around like a yappy puppy dog saying, well, try this. And what about this? And what about that value or this perspective? And the client is just, nah.
Behind that.
Say it again, Sue.
What's behind that? Why?
That is, again, a resistance from the client, but it could also be a lack of trust on the client's end, a lack of investment, that's all coming from a lack of resilience. And what that's really doing is they're not being responsible to themselves. They're projecting it onto the coach so they can avoid actually facing something within themselves. It's easier to say, I don't trust you. It's easier to say, I don't trust the process. It's easier to say, I'm not sure if I'm quite invested in what we're doing. So if the coach is not taking time to really, get resilience on the floor first, get investment and focus from the client, they're going to end up getting this runaround. Okay, and this, we spent a lot of time in module 1, is setting that foundation to get those 3 main ingredients in place. A sharply defined focus of what we're working on, along with an increase in investment into that focus, meaning what's the benefit back to the client and what are they putting into it, plus building resilience. So they're investing from a resilient place, not a fearful place. Those 3 together will bring in, it'll surface what's the real deeper issue we're looking at. Then you're building the client's desire and will to go through that exploration. Because if they don't have desire and will, they can abandon the process at any time, call you a failure, or they can blame themselves, and then we're going nowhere. I see you nodding. So what's landing or resonating for you there, Sue?
Yeah, no, I've just had experience of it, and I've had supervision through it.
Yeah, and sometimes what I've seen is that the coach and the client move too fast into exploring the topic that they initially put on the table. And sometimes that's because they're both in a rush to transform, and then it ends up being a false transformation. So it's better to take a little bit of time to really clarify the focus, the investment, and get a foundation of resilience. Then you get a much easier time, and it's a richer session. And here's another one. Sometimes the client can praise the coach. Like, oh my God, I feel so good when I'm with you. And whenever we have these sessions, I feel so empowered. So they're making the client into a guru. And the client can become addicted to that coaching. Now that's good for the client, for the coach's business, meaning, okay, I've got a return client. They keep extending the contracts. It's good for the coach's ego. But it ends up disempowering the client because they're putting all the power, again, onto the coach. And symptoms of this you might see, like the client is very praiseworthy of the coach, but they're really not doing their homework, or they're falling apart after the session, and then they need another session. Oh, I need that inspiration again. I need another injection of that coaching drug to keep me going. And whenever I'm with you, everything makes sense. But then when I go out in the world, it doesn't make sense anymore, so I got to come back. And some coaches really like that because it strokes their ego. But you need to develop immunity to that, because yes, it's great to know that you're very good. It's great to know that you are an inspiration to the client, but they ultimately must inspire themselves. You are the training wheels as they learn how to ride a bike. The training wheels don't make the bike rider, okay? They are the bike rider. So eventually those training wheels come off. So good business model is they're in for the business now, but it's a temporary contract, okay? And if they're gonna come back through that revolving door, it's gonna be on another level. It's not going to be, let's do the same thing all over again. That sometimes is a difficult thing for coaches to understand, because in fact, I believe it's a non-traditional model, meaning I'm in the business to get myself out of the business. Because otherwise, if there's a constant need for me from the same person, I'm actually not doing my job. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? And that can be a difficult thing to grasp. So even just the business can create some of these traps and codependencies. Okay. This also is, a lot of clients are hiring a coach to say, I want to transform myself. Yes, but if you make that your primary goal, A, you're going to rush the process, or B, again, you could skip over that cultivating resilience and get into, let's get this client transformed, or the issue transformed. We will end up helping, consulting, fixing, or saving to fast track the process. So transformation cannot be the goal. If, as a coach, you're okay that the client walks in the session and out exactly the same, you actually have more freedom. But if you say they must be different when they walk out the door at the end of that 60-minute session or 30-minute session, you're putting pressure on yourself to transform something. It is not your job to transform. When there's resilience, there is natural transformation, so that the transformation is a byproduct. So if your focus is on the client accessing that inner source, that inner resilience, and where they're able to face or confront something in themselves from a resilient place, it will be easy and natural and quite pleasurable, in fact. If we're not afraid of a little pain and suffering along the way, and we're still targeting the constant resilience of the client, whether they are aware of it or not, we just bring it back into their awareness, we facilitate access to it, then there will be a ton of transformative shifts that happen along the way. So actually, even though coaching is a transformational art, we cannot make transformation the primary target here, because that will start tripping you up. Any comments on that? This is what I had to deal with a lot when I was supervising coaches. As I said, forget transformation. They go, well, what do you mean? I don't know who I am if I don't focus on transformation. So, okay, time is flying. So let me show you this. There's 4 levels that we can get into on what is truth, okay, and 4 ways to engage in relationship. So your client is going to come from their story, and they're always playing games. So your client says, I have all these self-concerns. They're trapped in a bubble. Now, what I mean by that is they're coming from bias, identity, narrative. This is who I am. These are the experiences that made me who I am, okay? Now, we all are in this bubble, okay? We all have a story, but it's just one slice of the pie. It's a singular truth. I've gone through this in other webinars as well, so I'll try and keep this short. For the purpose of why are these games happening between coach and client is because if 2 people come together in a closed bubble, they're actually not truly experiencing each other. They're more projecting on each other, perceiving each other, and they're acting on those perceptions and judgments. This is what your client is naturally doing to themselves and out there in the world. They're in these constant games. Well, these are patterns. If you try to coach from here, well, here I am as my coach with my belief system. Here's the client with their belief system. There's going to be nothing to transform because the client is more interested in preserving that bubble, preserving these points of view and beliefs. So, and you and the client might say, well, yeah, these beliefs don't work for me, but so then you're going to end up convincing them, or they're going to end up trying to pull you into their beliefs, telling you lots of stories and justifications. It's not going to work. Why? Because they're not open or receptive. They need to drop into a further level where there is more acceptance of self and acceptance of what's around them so that they can allow themselves to be influenced and affected. What's going to open that bubble? Resilience. If they're not resilient, they're going to be defensive and protective, right? So how does this happen? And this is what we train very extensively in module 1. We spend about a day and a half. How do you get into this zone of where there's truth in flux? What this means is many truths can work together as being complementary. Black and white here is going to be oppositional, as if it's good and evil. Here, black and white can work together to give a larger spectrum of experience, okay? All the shades of gray in between, or hot and cold, work together to give a larger spectrum of temperature. This is where the coach actually needs to be, in an unconditional space, okay, of this dream, truth in flux. This is where transformation begins, because this is almost like the toggle zone of your iPhone, where you can start moving apps around, all right? Up here, everything is very stationary and pre-programmed. So it takes the coach to open their bubble first, and then, like a mirrored effect, the client begins to open. This is what we're talking about when we build safety and trust in a relationship. So how does this open? It begins with recognition and acceptance of what's happening over there, and then fascination, where we leave our bias behind, we leave our judgments behind. It doesn't mean we can't judge. It means we don't act upon the judgment. We're sometimes too quick to act on the judgment. Instead of acting upon the judgment, now we're saying, all right, what's over there? It is what it is. Now let's get fascinated with what's available there. And then we bring it back into ourselves, and we're able to be affected. Then we can start appreciating what's over there and begin to enjoy what's in the relationship between us. That starts with the coach, not with the client. This is why coaching methodologies are teaching listening and curiosity. But you could pretend like you're listening and curious with a very closed bubble. What we're teaching here in EED is how do you actually open that bubble and keep it open, still allow the client to close, allow your own bubble to close, but then go back and reopen it, and the client will drop with you. So the actual process is a dropping into this fluid state, okay, of acceptance, fascination, appreciation, and enjoyment, because that's where the act of co-creation is happening. What that also means is the coach is letting go of any kind of a status. I'm neither above nor below the client. And that will neutralize the client coming from any status of being above or below the coach. This is then again where the coaching really flows in this fluid state. The level below that is the level of source or essence, where there is really no identity anymore. This is where the client is really accessing their own source, inner wisdom, that feeling of permanence, timelessness, being unconditional, and everything is possible and everything can be true. Everything then, all paradox can be reconciled. And so what EED is doing is taking someone from story through their game, dropping them into dream and into source, plugging it in. Then from source, they can start rebuilding and define themselves. They can shift their patterns at the dream level, which then solidify into a new game, which then creates a new story for them. So what we're doing in EED is we're taking somebody through all 4 of these levels and back up. But the facilitator is remaining here because they're the most fluid and most responsive. That's what makes them immune to these kinds of games and traps. How is this for you to hear this process? And I do have other webinars that walk us through that in more detail. But any comments here, questions? Yeah, Lori.
Yeah, I find it really interesting and fascinating, and I can see where it aligns well with like CTEI's model, which is what I got my certification in. And you know, that like the leader, you had asked earlier about how we as coaches bring ourselves to the coaching relationship, and I always felt like you were a leader, like on the side of your client, like next to them, guiding them, but still not out in front or pushing them from behind. So I'm really interested in learning more about this, because it seems like it's even more fluid than that.
It is.
Yeah.
And I know you're referring to the 5 dimensions of leadership from CTI, which is leader in front, behind, the side, within, and then from the field. So you can do all those 5 dimensions from here with yourself in a closed bubble, but you're coming from bias. You can pretend like you're listening at level 2, level 3. So what EED is training you is to how to be really, really disciplined and aware with yourself. Like, am I truly in this open, fluid space? Because then I'm not leading from selectivity or bias. Everything actually is unconditional. There's an unconditional acceptance of what's happening, which means then you could still be in front or behind, have high resistance in front of you and not be shaken. Of course, you'll get destabilized, but you can bring yourself back, and you're not there to fix the resistance. You're there to use the resistance because it's a signal. So when we talk about traps in coaching, you could have a highly resistant client in front of you. From the EED perspective, you actually get excited and you welcome it because you're thinking something important is really going on here. I might feel really challenged here, so I plug into my own resilience. And I'll have more adaptability, versatility, and flexibility here. But if I start judging the client saying, you're uncoachable, or you're messing up the process, or you're playing small, and I might even be coming from goodwill to say, you know what, you're better than this. Don't be such a victim to yourself. But if I'm trying to act on that as a judgment, then I'm moving into helping, fixing, saving. I'm going to create more resistance from the client, and they're going to push back at me harder. Whereas I could say, hey, yeah, you can say that. Sounds pretty small. Sounds like you're indulging in your own victimhood. What's it like to hear that? I'm not acting from judgment. Now I'm coming from fascination, and I'm cultivating their fascination. I'm giving them a poke, but I'm more interested in what's their response. I'm now back in that dream level of fluidity where I'm not attached to what I'm saying or doing. I'm far more interested in what's the response coming back at me, and that's what I'm creating from. That's what CTI means when they say we're marrying your level 1 and your level 3 together. Meaning I'm taking from what's here, I throw that out there, see how it responds out there in the field or in the client, and then I can create the next thing and I can start sculpting. So, but in order to do that, you truly have to be out there from a place of humility, be in a learner mindset. Yes, you could still be an expert and you throw that out there, but you're also taking things back in, being affected yourself so that they can be affected. And that's what's creating that fluidity of no status. Tell me if that makes sense. I see you nodding. Lori, I know, Sue, you were also trained by CTI.
No, it makes sense.
Okay. In my experience, I saw a lot of distortions where people thought they were using the model and they didn't realize they were closed. And what they end up doing is they're projecting back onto their own clients. They're upset at the clients projecting back onto them. And all there is a power struggle going on because it's like 2 clashing philosophies, all right? And they both can mean well, but nothing is going to happen if these bubbles are closed. And so what's rarely taught is how to actually open that and make sure it's open, to see it's open, allow it to close, and then reopen it again. So what's really going on is you've got closed bubble, open. It opens, they close, you close it. It's this kind of an action. And when you can be okay with that things can open and close, but you're always redirecting back to the open fluid space. And even if that's open and fluid for 2 seconds, that's fine. Because once we've experienced it once, we can experience it again. So what we're really teaching here in EED is with your coaching, it's no matter what's going on, you're always returning the client to their resilience, but you're also allowing them to be non-resilient. They can experience both. And then there becomes gradually this primary space of, well, now they're resilient. The more they are experiencing resilience, the longer they're going to stay there. All right. So what can that look like in the coaching dynamic? All right. So like I said, the coach facilitator is always primarily in this space with this fluidity. That's how a coach can manage their own judgments, bias, etc. They're just not acting upon the bias or the judgment. They're more fascinated with what's going on out there. They're being affected by it to be more fascinated, all right? So the coach is always in a fluid and resilient state, or returning to a fluid, resilient state, okay? But the client, like I said, they're naturally in story game. They're always naturally in this closed bubbled state, okay? Sometimes they'll open naturally, but more often than not, they're in this closed state. The client can try to pull them into these three main roles. Well, they'll make the coach into an expert or a guru, or they'll ask the coach to help or fix, or they'll behave in such a way that they'll say, save me, rescue me. So all three of these games are just coming from non-resilient. I'm not resilient enough to trust myself to be my own expert, to be my own teacher, guru. I need you to do that for me. I don't possess the wisdom, or I don't possess the wisdom or the know-how or the resources to help myself. So therefore, if someone helps me and does the dirty work, you know, that just would be better. Whether that's from a lack of desire, will, or know-how, but even so, if they don't know, they still can go do the research to help themselves. Do you understand? Instead of saying, advise me, okay? Or I'm so deep in the mire, I'm so, you know, I'm just drowning here in the ocean. You know, I just need somebody to pull me out. And I'll play all kinds of drama games, and they can feel very real to me. And I'm appealing for you to, you know, throw me a rope, throw me the lifesaver, you know, and pull me out of this water. I'm drowning, I'm drowning, I'm drowning. And if you don't pay attention, you're cruel. Okay, that's the drowning game. Has anyone experienced that from clients where I'm drowning, I'm drowning, I'm suffering, I'm suffering? And they'll really appeal to the heart. Okay. So just be aware. Now, I mentioned before, EED focuses on action behavior, and you're more interested in the response, all right? What is the response of the client? How are they responding to themselves or to you or to the issue or to the moment? So we have what we call a primary loop. That's just action response. What you're doing is you're throwing out something into the water and you're seeing, you know, how the fish deals with it. If, you know, you throw the hook in, how are they hooking? So action, response, action, response. You can do the same thing with a role. You can sense the client wants you to be that expert. So you can temporarily step into it. You could say, yeah, of course, I can give you the advice. Here's my thought. Now, if you don't ask for the response, if you don't say, now, what does that do for you when I say that? Or it's not about, did you like the advice or not? Or do you agree or not agree? Just what happens to you when you hear that advice? What does that spark up in you? Because you want to appeal to their own creativity and inner wisdom. Now you've moved back into the clean role of the coach facilitator, because you're willing to let go of what you've just done, and you're more interested and fascinated in how are they responding. It's not, are they taking my advice, okay? So you can throw them a bone, but then what you're more interested in is, what is that bone provoking in them as far as their own wisdom and creativity and resilience is concerned? It's not about, are they taking my bone and do they like it, okay? Do you understand the difference here? You become the expert when you're very attached to what you're having an expertise in, or what you're trying to convey or purvey. So you can temporarily borrow from these roles, but what you always want to do is use it as a way to provoke something in the client. Let go of the role. Now you're more interested in what just got created from the client. That's the easy workaround, okay? How is this for you guys? Any questions or comments?
I think it's really helpful because like a lot of clients hire me because of my industry experience, and they ask me, they want the guru or the expert. And from a coaching perspective, I've been resisting that a lot. But I understand what you're saying about being curious about the response versus the reaction to the advice. That
That's
makes
right.
a lot of sense, because that also hopefully will stir up some things in themselves about their own level of resilience and their own ability to deal with these things without needing me.
Right, right. Because if they just take your advice and swallow it, whether with enthusiasm, fear, or apathy, or it doesn't matter, it's not theirs. They're not owning it. So your job as a coach is to have them cultivate ownership of whatever they choose, okay? Because otherwise, let's say they take your advice and you don't ask for that response, you'll never know if they're doing it to please you or if they're making you into a guru that they follow and now they feel obligated, right? So there's a lack of autonomy there, okay? And that's also a good point. So you may have clients that work in your industry of specialty from wherever you came from before that. And you can always say, yeah, of course I can advise you on this, and be really clear if you're going to advise, all right? The other way you can do it is say, yeah, really easy. I can give you advice in like 1, 2, 3 seconds here. I can give you a whole data dump. But let's do that later. Let's get you thinking for yourself, thinking on your feet, because I'm not going to be there with you when you walk into that meeting, or I'm not going to be there holding your hand unless you want me to, but then you're going to have to pay me on retainer, and I'm going to be right there beside you when you go to the bathroom, because that's basically what you're asking me to do, is hold your hand. So when you're on your own out there in the real world, I'm not there. So let's get you thinking on your feet first, because that more is your job, is how are they thinking on their feet? How are they accessing their feet? How are they accessing their thinking? If they knock themselves down, how do they get back up? You're there to observe. It's like if you're teaching them how to do a boxing match, okay, you want to see how they're pulling the punches and the defense. And then you want to give them a challenge to, how do they deal with that left curve and that knockout? Because if you're coaching the boxer, you're not in the ring when they do the competitive match, right? So you've got to look at it the same way. So of course you can show them, you can tell them. My rule of thumb is if they can't possibly know it, now I'll tell them, now I'll show them. But I will spend some time for them I want them to scratch their head. I want them to search around. I want them to explore possibilities before I give it to them. And then if I do give it to them, I'm really excited if they resist it. I will, because they'll say, wow, boom, what's that in you that just said you threw away my advice? Because that spark that pushed back, that means they do have an opinion, wisdom, an idea, and we want to bring that to the surface, okay? Sometimes I'll give them the wrong advice or the bad advice to see how they'll react. Or if I give them something and they go, oh, wow, and they swallow it really quick, I'll tell them, wow, you swallowed that really fast. You didn't even chew on it. What's going on there, right? To make them aware. So it's not about what you give, it's about what's their response. I can't underline that enough. Does that help you guys, or does that further clarify what's going on? Okay. Those are ways to get around these roles, okay? And you can use your imagination. So what's required of me when I'm the rescuer savior? What are they asking of me? Whatever they're asking of me, what quality in them enables them to do it themselves? Okay, what needs to be awakened in them for them to do that themselves? Because what they're really doing is they're trying to borrow that very quality from you. Okay. Whether it's to save, rescue, help, fix, advise, or be a teacher. How you guys doing with this? Okay, so it's at the top of the hour. Now, this was scheduled to be a 60-minute webinar, so if you do need to drop off, that's fine. Feel free. You don't have to apologize. And I am recording this, and I will send you all the recording, okay? So if you have to drop off, you can see the rest of it through the recording. Oh, here's what I wanted to say. Don't project your own dynamic on a client. Now, this can come from if a coach is experiencing a level of low competence or low confidence. It's really easy to become any of these three roles, like guru, savior, helper, because that'll boost your level of confidence. Like say, oh, I'm really helping them now. Now I feel better about myself. The client can give you a great response saying, oh my God, thank God, yeah, I've changed my life, right? But you have to realize when you're in those roles, you're disempowering the client's own resilience and autonomy. And that is the primary purpose of the coach, is to awaken their resilience and autonomy and have them own their resilience and autonomy. So these roles are more to spark something, so we open the door to resilience and autonomy. But if we resort to these roles and keep acting from them, we're taking away the resilience and autonomy. So keep yourself in check. I'm tempted to rescue, or I like to rescue. It makes me feel better. But what you're doing is you're disempowering the client. So don't project your own games onto a client. What allows you to return here is always an acceptance and fascination of what's going on over there in the client. If the client says, I'm drowning, I don't know what to do, I'm suffering, help me, please save me. If you accept that they're drowning and become fascinated with what's going on with them, then you won't resort to buying into that role they're asking you to do, okay? If you become accepting that they're actually in the water, kicking and screaming, saying, I'm drowning, help me, become fascinated with it, you'll start to realize, oh my God, they're actually swimming. How are they swimming even though they claim they're drowning? And then you can awaken the client's awareness and say, hey, wait a minute, focus. Like, look how you're struggling here and fighting. Like, what's that energy you're using? How is it you're actually swimming? How is it that you're still able to breathe while you claim that your head's going underwater, right? That's going to kick back their resilience. Now you've moved off the role. Does that help you? Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So what are some common client games here? And feel free to come in and share, like, what are some games you've experienced where the client is trying to pull you into any of these roles? Victim. We've talked about that. Vampirism. What do I mean by vampirism? They're sucking the life out of you. They're sucking the wisdom out of you. They're sucking the time out of you, okay? Again, it's that where they're making you do all the work, all right? Escape. This could look like avoidance, distraction, unfocused, or always searching for green pastures and always avoiding the hard stuff or the real stuff. And they want to keep it light. Well, why can't we just feel good here? Or even escapism can look like, you say, well, what's a value you've got? Oh, well, I have this value. And then, oh my God, now I feel so wonderful and great. And they get so highly resonant, so fast, so easy, but it can be easily deflated with one little pinprick, okay? That is partly what escapism is like. Or it can be control and manipulation. They're trying to control the session. They're trying to control you. They're trying to control themselves, all right? Sometimes with manipulation, it's not that they're purposefully manipulating you. This could be unconscious, all right? These are these kinds of power struggles that are happening. Some of these did sound familiar, or some not so familiar.
Yeah, I have one client in particular where they're just, I guess I would consider it escape, or they're just like, it almost feels like they're forced to be there. And it's a corporate client. So there, a lot of times, even though I ask him to show up, with topics or to reflect on the homework for last week, it'll be, I didn't have time to do the homework and I don't have any topic for today. So it's definitely that resistance to dealing with whatever is going on for him.
That's actually more control and manipulation.
Yeah.
right? And yeah, there can be like avoiding the entire relationship and saying, I'm forced to be here, right? But yeah, so what that is coming from is they don't have enough investment in why they're there, what's going on, and they're kind of playing the victim to, well, the company sent me here, right?
Yeah.
Then they become a vampire for your time because they're being unresponsive. So they're sucking your time, making you work, making you try to find some in, right? So all four of those are actually working together with that one client in that way. So what's really needed is first an acceptance of, okay, so yeah, you are in a way forced here. We have however much time it is, 60 minutes together. We can sit here and do absolutely nothing. What is it you want out of this? What is it that actually would feel engaging to you? Do you need to tell me stories for an hour? Do you want to play cards? Right? It's like, what gives you best use of your time? And if we do that, what's the benefit you get in return? So you really want that return on their investment. What are they investing in and what's the return? Because now you're moving them away from obligation.
Yeah.
Right? So that helps a lot. And then resilience. And the first thing is, well, you don't have to show up. You could skip the session. What brought you here? There's a part of you that still made you walk in that door. So there's a desire and there's resilience. And they might say, well, I'm supposed to. Well, no, you can break the rule. Oh no, I could never break a rule. Okay, now we got a topic.
Yeah.
Right? I'll never break rules. And because of those rules, I feel imprisoned. And I don't feel like I'm acting from a will of my own. See, there we go. Using the dynamic of what's happening to surface the topic. So that's how you can turn it around, for example. I'm not saying you need to do all those things with that particular client, but it's just an example, right?
Yeah, thank you.
So like I said, lack of trust or investment. And then they might have all of these behaviors, but it's really lack of investment. They don't know why they're there or what it's for, what the return is. And then they could be clinging to some kind of an identity or a bias. So they could be clinging to, I'm a victim here, or I'm going to be a rebel. So that client could even be, I'm a rebel. So yeah, fine. The company tells me to be here. I'll be here, but I'm not participating, right? That's the rebel. Or they could be a performer to just say and do whatever they think you want to hear, right? And there's never this level of truth, depth, or authenticity going on. And they're there to please you or to please some idea of what they think they should be. Or they're a crusader, meaning I'm out here to prove you wrong. I'm going to prove that you're incompetent, right? That's, again, one of those challenging controller type clients. Or on a crusade to say, I really believe in what you do, right? And they're on a crusade to actually lift you up. But it's still, they're not acting from themselves, okay? Now, a coach can have some games too. A coach could be coming from their own need for validation or control, all right? Let's use your example, Lori. This client walks in and says, well, but I've been hired by the company, therefore I have to make this work, because if I don't, I'm going to get in trouble by the client. I'm going to ruin my own reputation, credibility. I need to look good. So you're putting your own interest over the client, and you're going to try and control the client to make them participate, whatever. And all that's going to do is aggravate more resistance, right? And that could be an unconscious need for validation or control. Or it's like, oh my God, well, you're the first. All my other clients really enjoy these sessions, and you're the first one that doesn't. Oh my God, there must be something wrong with me. Or there must be something wrong with you, right? Again, that's coming from validation or control. So what could validation look like? It could mean I'm using my coaching sessions to boost my own confidence or boost my own level of competence. If I get a client that resists me, that lessens my confidence or feeling of competence. Or there could be heroism or being virtuous, like I'm saving lives. I feel so good about myself when I hang up the phone because I just took that client through a hard time and they're playing such a bigger game than they ever were before. And it's because of me. And I give myself a good pat in the back and I wear my hero's badge. That can cross over into, again, disempowering the client because now it's becoming more about you than them, okay? And you'll see lots of coaches that embed that in their marketing. Or they try to appeal to the heroism in you to make you become a coach or a better coach. Take my course because you'll be even more of a hero with your client. And look at all those poor people out there that are living these miserable lives and because of you, right? So they're trying to get you on this crusade through heroism. Or you could be creating codependence, whether that's conscious or unconscious. Like my clients need me. Without me, my clients will, again, suffer or not help. And this might be upsetting for some coaches to hear because they'll say, oh, but I don't do that. Well, check yourself, question yourself. Am I doing that in really slight and subtle ways? And if I am, what's going on with me? Because I'm putting a game onto the client. You're not clean, okay? The big one is seeing the client as fragile. So if we say, and as CTI says, clients are creative, resourceful, and whole. So then no matter how my client shows up, if they bitch and complain, or if they're drowning, they're still resourceful here. Let's get them accessing the resources. Let's get them aware of the resources. And I'll allow them to perform in front of me as if they're fragile. But I know that ultimately they're not. So let's let the client break. But if I'm afraid, oh, my client might fall apart, I'm now treating them as fragile. So watch out if you're seeing clients as being fragile, even if they present themselves as fragile, because that's going to start limiting how you interact with them. You'll start falling into those roles again, those outside roles of guru, savior, helper, fixer. Now, the coach can also cling to an identity or a bias, and this is where they're not being clean anymore. They might think they're listening, they might think they're fascinated, but they're actually driving their coaching through certain judgments, like my client cannot have these political beliefs. My client cannot have these certain isms, whether that's gender, race, politics, religion, whatever. Ooh, my client cannot say this or that, or I cannot say this or that because that might be politically incorrect. So identity does not belong in coaching. I'm going to say that very clearly. Otherwise, we're coaching on a crusade, or we're making our clients into warriors, or we're a warrior of something, or making clients into rock stars of this and that. Or we're trying to be a teacher to the client, saying, well, I'll teach you, or you can't be a misogynist. You can't be a racist. You can't be this or that, because that's not a value I hold as a coach. No, the best coaching comes from when you are still able to remain clean as a coach with a client who has the opposite set of values to you, and you're still able to access their resilience and have them own themselves. So what I'm going to say about that, when there's a clash of values between the coach and the client might start resorting to their own bias or identity, or say, I can't coach that kind of a client. I can't coach a Joe Biden supporter. I can't coach a Trump supporter. I can't coach a communist. I can't coach a capitalist, okay? Now you're determining your own coaching through a bias. You're not clean, all right? I lost my train of thought there. It can be a test. I'm trying to find my way back here, why I got onto that. Resilience. It will test your own resilience. here it is. When we can still access that level of resilience, that dream level of fluidity, we'll realize that even if we have opposite sets of values, they will be complementary to each other. We can still reinforce each other. When we drop into source, and when the client drops into source, that cleans up any distortions they may have, where a lot of these isms and identity is actually just developed through certain fears or emptiness. When they're at source, there is no more emptiness. There is no more fear. There is unity. And so there is a natural morality and a natural harmony that comes from being at source. The four main experiences of being at source is unconditional unity, unconditional love, unconditional limitlessness, unconditional peace. If I am experiencing unconditional peace or love, why would I need to compete with you? Why would I need to kill you? Why would I need to hurt you? Because if I'm experiencing unity, when I'm hurting you, I also feel the same hurt. So therefore, why would I need to judge you according to your creed, your skin color, your orientation, your gender, your et cetera, et cetera? Those things don't exist at source. Source allows unlimited variety and diversity because it's all expressions of the same thing. When that is felt unconditionally, again, there is a natural morality where I will not want to steal something from you because I'm at source. I'm experiencing abundance. I don't want to steal your life. I don't want to steal your will. So I don't need to validate myself. I don't need to control you. How is it to hear that? And we get into those things in other webinars in much more detail, but I needed to bring that up. Why I'm saying identity or bias does not belong in the coach role. Any comments or questions there? New or not new? Yeah, go ahead, Lori. Or you didn't have anything to say, or?
No, I think it can be challenging, you know, but that disassociation with identity is, it feels like that's broader work, and it's very, I think it's amazing when I feel like I'm in that place, but it also, I think, you know, in many ways, our world's not set up to be able to not have our lives be around our identity. Like, that's so forced.
Yeah. It's actually aggravated right now, and that's been happening way more since 2020 began, right? There's such a push for identity and identity politics and shaming and guilting and all of these things. So what that is doing is the world is reinforcing this story bubble to get more and more rigid, and that bubble gets thicker and thicker, right? Which is creating more opposition and more isolation. So dropping into that dream level, A, is even more important, but B, can now become even more challenging, especially when the rules are set up that with cancel culture and censorship going on now, oh, we can't say this, can't say that. Well, what is censorship and cancel culture really doing? It's saying we are fragile. It's saying we are non-resilient. So it's actually anti-resilience, right? So actually coaches need a little bit more daring and bravery now to be able to be willing to challenge a client, focus on resilience, make that primary, and be willing not to challenge out of, oh, I'm going to break your bias or punish you or teach you something. No, what we want is for the client, both coach and client, to be willing to question themselves. If identity is coming onto the table, great, you have that identity, it's working for you, and let's question it too. Identity is like saying, I have a bouncy ball and I live for this bouncy ball. And I'll say, well, show me how it bounces. How dare you doubt my bouncy ball? You should just take my word for it. I have a bouncy ball. It's beautiful. Are you saying I'm not beautiful? How dare you test my bouncy ball? What they're doing is saying, I have a bouncy ball and I'm putting it on this shelf under glass like it's in a museum, and let's worship the bouncy ball. We're making it precious, which means we're making it fragile. What we need to do is say, here's my bouncy ball. Let's see if it bounces. I take the risk to throw it against the wall and see if it really bounces. Because if it's bouncy, it'll bounce. If it's made of glass and it shatters, well, then it wasn't a bouncy ball. Do you understand? But people are getting less and less willing to see if the ball actually bounces, because they're more attached to the idea of the bounciness than the reality of it. Does this making sense what I'm saying? So we need to be willing to crack open, break open that bubble to see how that bubble really works for them. And the only way they'll know is if they're willing to let other information in. How will they let other information in? By becoming resilient. It's through resilience they can open that bubble. It's through resilience they'll cling less to an identity. We use identity as a vehicle to navigate through life and through the world, but we are not our identity. We come from source, and identity is only one small expression of source. And so we'll get a richer life when we can migrate through many kinds of identities and work with many other identities in a complementary fashion. There's my spiel. Yeah, go ahead, Lori.
Right. So you mentioned the first module is about resilience. Do you talk about ways to work with clients to help build that resilience?
Oh yeah, that's what it's completely focused on.
Great.
So we take you into the foundation of resilience, how to get yourself there, how to train yourself to open the bubble and have it remain open. It'll open, close. Then how to work with, when you're in that open bubble, how do you get the other person to naturally open theirs? How do you deal with it when it closes? And then get the relationship in that fluid state. And you get there, you're in this fluid state. Then we apply that back into the coaching context, where how do you work with a client to bring their topic up? How do you put the topic aside to have them drop into resilience, anchor it, have that now resilience free flowing, bring back the topic. Now they can deal with the topic in a resilient state. That's 3 full days. And then we end with, how do you create that kind of a foundation in the session so that they have a clear focus, clear investment, clear foundation of resilience, ready to go on a deeper exploration that's worth it to them. They have the will and desire to go through it instead of dragging their feet into it.
Got it.
And then
Great.
module 2 works with all the fancy ways to work with strong resistance, neutralize it, reconvert it back into resilience. But you need the foundation of resilience first in order to deal with all that other fancy, I'll call it fancy complex stuff. It's actually not that complex. Once you understand resilience, nothing is complex anymore. So, and that's happening April 9th to 11th, all right? Okay, did I have anything more? Oh my God.
What time zone?
Oh, it's operating actually off the European time zone, which is starting at 1 p.m. Here, I'll fast forward there to show you here. Wow, I got a lot. So the timing is 1 p.m. European time, which would be 7 a.m. Eastern. I don't know if you're in the Eastern time zone, so it would be an early rise. Oh, you're in California? Yeah, that would be really early, 4 a.m. What I'm also planning to do is to offer North American time zone friendly session times. I'm going to open that for May and or June. And what we would not, we do shorter sessions spread over a longer time. So it would look like 7 sessions, probably within 3 weeks, like 2 sessions a week for 3 weeks, and then a follow-up session after. And that might look like it would be like for your time, California, the morning, like say from 10 to 1:30 or something like that. And these would be more time zone friendly for North Americans. And that should come up in May, June. I will make announcements out of that, or email me to say, put me on the list so that I'm the first to find out. Or you can also go to the website and subscribe to the newsletter, the mailing list.
Okay.
What I'm thinking is, maybe I should reserve a part 2 here, because we've gone almost a half an hour overtime. So then what I'll say is our next webinar is on April 7th. That's balancing masculine and feminine energy, which is a very interesting subject, because those genders, well, I'm not talking about gender, I'm talking about energies. Two different kinds of energies that work together for the creative process, and they get stigmatized, okay? One thing we do in EED is we get both of those energies flowing right from the get-go, and module 3 really focuses on reconciling those two energies together, as well as our conflict courses. So I wanted to introduce people to how do you have them work together, and then that really opens the spectrum of human potential and creativity. On March 23rd, I'm doing a program info call. I'm going to be making announcements about that. I'm going to put that actually on the registration site and our website, so you can get a link to it. It's just going to be a simple Zoom sign-up link. So if you're interested, now I can go through these modules in much more detail. And then I'm going to do this special EED webinar on March 31st. I haven't quite chosen the theme yet, but I wanted to insert another webinar because I had space to do it.
Okay.
Well, thanks for sticking around, Lori.
Yeah,
I'd love to know what you're walking away with here.
I'm walking away with, I really like the model of moving from the conditional to the unconditional, and really being curious and looking for, being curious about the response versus the actual reaction, and like how is a client responding to a potential provocation, and yeah, I'm just really curious about learning more about how to get into that space more quickly with my clients, since I work mostly with managers and leaders. I want to make sure that I'm able to really support them in their own development. In a lot of the games that you mentioned, I've seen those, and so I want to make sure that I have better ways of working through those with them. So.
Yeah, and to find that fine balance. This is especially true for if your clients are managers, leaders, or you're in a corporate environment.
Yeah.
If you're too soft, too just receptive, and they're not. They also want some pushback from you. So you want primarily to be in that space of acceptance and fascination, but you also want to be able to provoke. So if you look on the YouTube channel back through past webinars, I've got some webinars on like the art of provocation. I've got webinars on like the basics of building resilience, liberating the resilience up, and that speaks about how to get in that sweet spot of the send receive, this open bubble state I'm talking about. Also, core vitality and resilient well-being. That was one I did last year, which is how to plug into the resilient state with the client. Like, what specifically do you do? Yeah. All that stuff we teach in the module 1. So yeah. And I think I need to do more webinars just on this kind of a dynamic to get it, go through it in more detail.
Yeah, it was really helpful.
Great. Yeah. So just for those watching the recording here, just remember that transformation begins with resilience. Okay, transformation does not begin with fixing and helping or saving. It begins with resilience. Facilitate access to source. Then transformation will occur naturally. If your client is playing a game with you, take that as information. Don't take that personally, because they're playing that game somewhere else. Use it as a pattern to surface. That will surface the deeper topic. Your own coaching begins with humility. If you're not coming from humility, you're already putting resistance in the relationship because you're coming from higher status. Your bubble is actually closed. So begin with acceptance, fascination, and appreciation. Be willing to be affected. Be willing to be a learner that is fascinated with how is the resilience constantly surfacing in this client. That's what's going to create very quick trust and safety with the client. And then they'll start opening the bubble. Again, the purpose is to awaken the client to their own resilience and autonomy. It's not about awakening them to your bias, meaning client, you're playing small, you need to be bigger, or client, you shouldn't be operating in that way. That's your bias, okay? Challenge your own bias, challenge their bias, allow them to taste resilience and resistance, allow them to have both experiences, then they can make a choice. So your relationship with them becomes more resilient when you're willing to question everything and they become willing to question everything. Then they can make a choice based on autonomy. Like I mentioned, once they hit source, there is a natural morality that they'll experience because they're experiencing unconditional qualities. So this is why we don't need to come from bias, because once they're at source, there is going to be a natural humanity that emerges, okay? So don't worry about if there's a clash of values between you and the client. Oh, that was from last webinar. Didn't mean to have that there, but okay. If an energy is false, take it away. If it's unconditional, it's resilient and anchored. So, you know, anyways, test that with yourself. So to be clear, be more fascinated with how the client responds than being fascinated with what you're trying to provoke or trying to do. To keep things really clean, always create from response. I think that's the whole big message of this whole webinar is be fascinated with the response you're getting from the client. It's not about what you do, it's about what they do, okay? So thank you so much, Lori, for sticking around. Thank you to all of those watching the recording for watching to the end. If you have questions, feel free to email me, info@essence-dynamics.com. The first time you email, you're going to get a message to say, are you a real human being? It's just to cut down on spam. So all you have to do is just reply to that, and then you're in, and your message hits my inbox. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter @EE Dynamics, or visit the website essence-dynamics.com. So I'm hoping that you gained a lot of insight from this. Play around, experiment, and I hope to see all of you at more webinars, and the next one is April 7th. And we'll do a special webinar on March 31st. And in the meantime, keep radiant, remain resilient, and most of all, enjoy life and enjoy yourself and enjoy the world around you.